our EVs cost too much. And that makes it hard for Americans to want to buy them. If you want to sell those cars here, come make them here. We have a huge risk here that 10 years from now, our companies will just be not competitive at all in other global markets.
Just blocks from the White House, there's a beautiful greenhouse. Sunlight and warm air nurture plants and research about plant evolution, bees and caterpillars, butterfly genetics, the effects of a changing climate. This is a place of growth and discovery. And welcome to the Greenhouse on the campus of the George Washington University. I'm Frank Sesno from the Alliance for a Sustainable Future. And today, for a little homegrown wisdom, we're joined by J.P. Helveston, Associate Professor of Engineering at the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, Systems Engineering. You like the forest we're in here? This is a good thing.
It's nice touch. I feel like I have a few of these in my backyard. They look very...
we're trying to make them grow better here.
Yeah.
That's the research that's underway. So your focus here in your research and your work is on transitions to energy-saving technologies and with a particular focus on China.
Yes.
Among other things. So no shortage of stuff to do these days.
It's been a busy year, to say the least, with a lot of transition going on in the world. Being in the United States and what's going on between the US and China, there's a lot of tension.
Yes, I want to focus today with you on an article you recently had published in Science. Mm-hmm. A lot of research looking at batteries, EVs, and China.
Yep.
And I want to start with, in my business, what we call the lead here. Mm. This phrase about America becoming an island of tailpipes. An island of tailpipes.
Yeah.
What is that and what's going on?
I'd say it's a risk. It's not an inevitable outcome, but there's a fear that the world is going to electrified vehicle technologies. So electric cars are going to become the future of automotive. And the US is gradually making its way to that. And there's a worry that if we don't really go after that aggressively, that we're going to be left behind. And so we're going to be just driving gas guzzlers, and while the whole world goes electric.
Seems like the rug has been pulled out from under the American EV industry.
I think that's a good way of putting it for this particular year. I mean, when you're transitioning to a completely new technology platform, you need support to do that. No one company can do that on their own. You need the whole industry to move. You need government support for that, which in the US has been on and off. And so we had this huge surge in support for EV investment under the Biden administration with the Inflation Reduction Act. And this year, the Republican Congress basically pulled out most of the incentives. So we saw, similarly sized investments, tens of billions a couple years ago that are now, they have to pull those back.
And this has happened, similar kinds of thing, where the incentives have been pulled back in Germany and Canada and other countries. And in all places, the purchase, the speed of the transition or the move to EVs has slowed substantially. Is America different?
One of our biggest differences is that we tend to change power every 4 years, right? So we have a very high turnover in our, who's in leadership and the direction that we're headed. And that is a particularly hard challenge for something like transitioning to EVs, which is something that's sort of a decade-long kind of journey. You have to make decade-long investments. You can't make one that you expect to only last 2 years. So I think that is a particular challenge for us, is the constant turnover of power. And unless we have a stable, where both parties are supporting this, it's going to be a continued challenge.
Give me a little comparison between the EV market in China versus us, the products they've got, the range they've got, the cost comparison. Like, what are we talking about here?
Sure. So it's a much more competitive market over there. And this is something I find people are shocked to find out. But let's think about affordability. What EV could you get for under $40,000? In the US, there's like 4. And the ranges of those cars are on average 170 miles. In China, there's 130 models.
130 models?
130 models that are listed for under $40,000. The average range is 270 miles. So you're getting a lot more range, a lot more product for a lot less money. And if you look at the top selling cars, just in the top 10, all but Tesla are domestic Chinese companies that most people have never heard of. Maybe you've heard of BYD, but you've probably not heard of Zeekr and NIO and XPeng and These are very impressive cars. The quality is very high, and the design, the attention to detail in the design is really high.
And this is what's selling in China?
Yes.
And it's what China is selling around the world?
So yes, there are exports, and actually their number one exporter is Tesla, or it was until this year, but they were exporting a lot of Teslas out of the Shanghai factory to Europe. But to a lot of other countries in the world, they are exporting a lot of these top-selling cars. And BYD is one of the bigger exporters, and they sell more sort of affordable, but sort of an electric version of a Camry, so to speak. Just a common car that's nice and affordable, but it's electric. So those are going all over the world. And if you want to get to the top end, you get to higher performance, 300 plus miles of range. They have those as well, but they are about $45,000 to $50,000. In the U.S., the average price of something that much range is $80,000. So it's, again, you can find the cars here, but you have to pay for them here.
And are they that much cheaper because labor in China is so cheap and they're taking advantage of their workers? Is that the secret sauce?
Yeah, I think that's a big misperception. Wages haven't been cheap in China for a long time, actually. I mean, wages have been climbing consistently for the last 20 years. So the biggest advantages now are, for one, a very efficient supply chain, right? So down to the raw materials, every aspect of how that battery is made, for example, is highly, highly automated. Super efficient. There's very few people in some of these factories. And on top of that, because it's so automated, their defect rate is extremely low. I mean, their battery facilities are getting something like 99% yield rates, meaning only 1% have to be tossed. In the US, we're not getting that. It's very, very hard to get that level of perfection in your production process. So it's a tremendous amount of production engineering that's gone on over the past 10 to 15 years, where they've just squeezed out every bit of efficiency. And you see it when you look at the cost of batteries. 10 years ago, or maybe 15 years ago, it was $1,000 per kilowatt hour. It's $100 a kilowatt hour today.
Tenth of the cost.
Yeah, and you don't get there by low wages. Actually, wages have climbed that entire period. So wages have gone up, but the costs have gone down exponentially.
In your article, you point out the $200+ billion that the Chinese government has invested in this sector, and the infrastructure, the charge points. It blew my mind when I saw those numbers. How much more China has than the U.S.
There was a great quote from a stat from a couple years ago where they put in more chargers in 1 month in December. I think this was December 22 than we had in the whole country in the United States.
The entire country in a month?
Yeah, in 1 month. And the numbers are similar in sales. So China sells about 1 to 2 million electric cars per month. That's what we're selling in a year here. So it's very similar. The sort of speed of everything is like 1 month there is like a year here in
Could I just
EVs.
ask you to define your term? When you say electric vehicles, just so we're clear, what are you talking about? Are you talking about pure electric or plug-in or what?
So they have both. I mean, I think most people are tracking the full electric vehicles, what we call battery electric cars. And that's like your Teslas. They have no gas engine. You just plug in and drive. There are other technologies. There's plug-in hybrids and extended range EVs, and those are also picking up in China. We're seeing the whole suite of spectrum of electrified vehicles.
I want to come back to the infrastructure for a minute because the numbers are striking. You cited in your article, at the end of 2024, China had nearly 3.6 million charge points.
Yeah.
We had 200,000 in this country.
Yeah, we're talking different orders of magnitude and everything. Essentially, almost everything you see in the U.S., just add a zero, and that's China. So 1 million sales, they have 10 million sales. 100,000 chargers, they have 1 million chargers. More zeros there. So the scale is staggering.
But did the Chinese government basically say, thou shalt buy an electric vehicle, and that's why they've got to where they have? Or is this the choice of the consumer? Because
right, and this is, I think, it's a really important point that there was no command from the government to say you have to buy only this car. We're going to ban gas cars. I mean, we have to remember that China was the biggest gas car market, and still is, in the world, by a very large factor. I mean, they were selling 20-ish million gas cars a year just 5 years ago.
So here's the controversial part of your paper.
Sure.
You and your article, you call for strategic collaboration with China.
Yeah.
That's not what we're doing now, where we've said, China, stay out. We don't want your cars here. We don't want your battery technology here. We put tariffs up. What exactly do you mean by strategic collaboration with a country that the president has said is a strategic competitor?
Right. I think we have to just sort of recognize, sort of take a look in the mirror and where are we at as a nation in terms of our automotive industry, and where is China at, and where's the world going? the world's going electric, and my biggest fear is we're losing global markets. When I'm talking about strategic collaboration, I'm talking about allowing access to let our automakers work with the best companies in the world, right? And let's not tie their hands and say you're not allowed to work with this particular company because it comes from China, right?
What kind of companies you talk about? Battery technology?
It could be the supply chain, right? So it could just be that we have battery companies here that are buying materials from China. It could be companies here that are licensing technology from a Chinese battery maker. It could be that battery maker actually comes here and puts a factory together and hires Americans and builds batteries here to put in our American cars. Those are different levels of collaboration, but all of them are collaboration. It is engaging in a business deal to get us access to the best technology that is the lowest cost today so that we can start to scale. Our biggest factor that we're struggling with is affordability. Our EVs cost too much, and that makes it hard for Americans to want to buy them. It's just too expensive.
You come at this problem as a systems engineer, so you think about it, I think, entirely differently than a politician. How does a systems engineer, how do you come at this?
Yeah, so I think systems engineers look at the connections in between all the pieces. What are all the things that need to align to make something happen? How do you put all the pieces in line to make a rocket take off, right? It's not just the technology, it's the people, the businesses, where the investments are happening. You have to think about the realities of all of those things. Otherwise, it doesn't happen, right? So if we want to have electric cars here in the US alone, just here, not globally, but just here, we have to have lower prices. All right, how do we achieve that? Get our costs down. How do we get our costs down? Find cheaper materials, find faster ways to make the product, find ways to automate production. I mean, there's a cascading sort of reasoning of like, just go down every path and break up a complex problem into lots of pieces, work on all the pieces and try to put it back together. That's sort of how engineers tackle hard problems. We see something complex, we get excited by that. We don't run away from it. So it's a different approach.
The complexity is something that a lot of other folks don't embrace because it's easier to come up with a soundbite that plays into a certain narrative. Yeah. So this systems engineer, J.P. Helveston, wrote in Science that your strategic collaboration that you're talking about, realigning this relationship between the United States and China, depends on the willingness of China to collaborate and the willingness of the United States to allow innovative Chinese firms market access.
Yeah.
You're asking an awful lot at a very difficult political moment.
What's I think so ironic here is it sounds like we're asking a lot, and it's only because the politicians don't want to do this.
Because they don't think like systems engineers.
Well, it's also they don't think about the businesses. I mean, if you talk to the businesses, many of them on both sides are actually quite eager to do this. I mean, the battery companies in particular in China are very happy to come here and build a factory here and hire American workers and meet the requirements that we put on them to do so, because it's hard to make money in China right now. They're so competitive. The competition over there is so high that it's actually very hard to be profitable. So they're eager to come here, even if it requires giving some of IP to what otherwise would be a competitor. They're eager to do that, and I think our automakers would also embrace a opportunity to make a lower cost car if they could find a way to do it.
So on a policy level then, JP, what would strategic collaboration require here? We have tariffs, we have foreign direct, we have restrictions on foreign direct investment in this country and other things. And you call for some of these things in your paper. So what are they?
So I think there's an important point to think about. Where do we set the tariffs? Tariffs is a big question. I think it's actually reasonable to put a steep enough tariff to say we're not going to allow the full import of the whole car, because that does have a hollowing out effect on our industrial base. Where we could stand to benefit is to allow direct investment from China, to come here and build factories here, right? So we're still doing the manufacturing here, we're still growing the jobs here, doing the training, doing the learning. If you're not manufacturing, there's a lot less you're learning, right? So that's what I want to see is, increased investment in manufacturing, especially batteries and the other components we need, motors for electric vehicles, and allow access to Chinese companies who want to come here and do that.
Should Chinese companies be able to sell Chinese cars here?
If you want to sell those cars here, come make them here, right? Come build a factory, come bring your capital, bring your investment over, hire American workers, And also, we're going to learn from that, right? And we've been here before, by the way. I mean, there's a long history of this, not just in the U.S., but in general in automotive. When you're behind, especially substantially behind, you bring your competitor over and learn from them, right? And we've done this in the past. We had Toyota come over in the 80s, and we learned from them. They were doing things differently. They were manufacturing differently, and we learned some of those techniques. So that's what I would advocate for. So not just allow them to be imported and mop the floor with a competition here, but to make the cars here and then put some competitive pressure on the market so that now we have affordable EVs being made here. Our companies have to now step up.
In my journalistic days, I spent a lot of time covering the U.S. auto industry and the U.S. market. And I went to Smyrna, Tennessee after Nissan built its plant there, and it was a dramatic thing. Marysville, Ohio was Honda.
Yep.
When Japan came into this marketplace in the 70s and 80s, it blew up the U.S. auto industry.
Yeah.
It really hurt the U.S. auto industry. Is this just the next pain point for the U.S. auto industry? You let China in a little bit, they undersell, underprice, and it's a death knell for the U.S. auto industry. Some say that.
Some say that, but GM and Ford are still here, right? I mean, it put competitive pressure on them.
Greatly diminished from what they were
in
terms of market share before Japan came here.
Yes, so let's ask about what's important here. Having only American companies selling and making cars here, or having a thriving auto industry that we can talk about as a nation that hires many millions of Americans and is a huge job provider and is a huge source of economic activity. So there's two different things there. I want our companies to succeed. Sure, I would love to have our American companies be making more of the profit, and all that profit that Toyota makes does go back. Some of that goes back to Japan, right? But they hire more Americans than they do Japanese, right? So at the end of the day, our industry is still stronger by having the best competitors here and competing with each other and innovating. Otherwise, we get stagnant and we don't innovate. And so this is a pain point I think we're going to have to go through.
What's at stake here?
I think what's at stake is our market shrinking to not even North America, but shrinking to just the United States and maybe Canada. We have a huge risk here that 10 years from now, our companies will just be not competitive at all in other global markets. We're seeing it happen in the China market where GM, for example, China was their biggest and most important market. They made more money there than they did here. And now they've fallen off a cliff there. Their sales have diminished, and they don't have a competitive electric car to sell there. So tastes are changing, and we're losing that market. That kind of thing could happen all around the world. And so that's a big risk. I mean, now you have less capital to invest, less of everything to move forward, and you're going to be on the back foot for another 10 years maybe trying to recover from that. So there's a lot of long-term risk if we don't have a strong competitive EV market in the country. There's also national security implications for all of this. And this is something that I think people often overlook, which is that
national security in the U.S. auto industry?
In the U.S. defense industry, that the defense industry is increasingly also electrified, that we have motors and batteries and sensors on all of our weapons now. We have drones. Look at what's happening in Ukraine with drone warfare. Those require motors and batteries. And if you don't have a domestic source of all of those components, you're not going to be able to make those weapons. That's a big vulnerability. And the best way to have a market for all of that is to have an EV market. Electric cars require huge amounts of batteries and motors. So factories that are making these components for cars now can also provide the other things you need for other parts of the economy.
And the perfect example of that in history, it was the U.S. auto industry that let this country gear up for World War II and to crank out all those tanks and planes.
Yeah.
So there was a connection there too. I mean, obviously there were
This is why I emphasize domestic manufacturing still. I think it's so important that we still make the cars here. And so people, I think, might read this the wrong way and think, oh, you just want me to open the floodgates to competition. I would say no, because that competition is very fierce. And that could be very detrimental long term. But there's also a long-term risk of not competing ourselves, of not stepping up to producing competitive, affordable electric cars, because that means long term we're going to be behind and we're going to be struggling to catch up.
How did you get into this? I mean, it's great. I really recommend your work and the article in Science and elsewhere that you've done. How did you get into this? Why do cars interest you?
So I had a very unique, background. I was always interested in cars, especially new technologies, even as an undergrad. I mean, I went to Virginia Tech for my undergrad, and I studied fuel cell cars. I was in a little research lab, tinkering with fuel cells. And this was 2006, 7, when I thought...
And fuel cells were new.
Yeah, fuel cells were maybe the future, who knows? But I always was interested in what else can we do with automotive? Where's the frontier of automotive? And then I got a chance to go study in China. I got a study abroad experience through this little scholarship called the Horton Scholarship. It was a great experience, and I saw a whole different world over there of what was happening. Even then, this was like 2009, 10.
What were you saying?
A lot of investments moving into EVs, right? So a lot of change happening. We already had Tesla, we had the Nissan Leaf, we had the Volt, we had some early projects here that were working, but we weren't seeing industry coordination happening yet. Over there, it was already very clear that, upstream things, like we need to scale up our refining processes to refine all these minerals that we need for batteries. Those kinds of things were starting. And it was like, oh, so they're thinking 10 years from now. And here we are, 15 years later, and it's all scaled up.
Thank you very much for coming to the greenhouse. Really appreciate all the work you put into this and the systems engineering process, because I think that is how we have to think about this.
Yeah.
It's a complicated thing. By the way, these are loblolly pines.
Loblolly,
okay. They grow in the Chesapeake, and this is an experiment behind us to see how they do under different circumstances. More salination slows them down. Less, they grow faster.
They look like they're doing better.
It's your building.
So yeah, downstairs. My office is downstairs in this building. Who knew? Right on top, we have this beautiful greenhouse right up here. It's quite nice.
We like to hang out here. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.